My name is Milo Pyne. I do. I live in Durham, and I grew up in Durham. We have a collection of political posters. One is from the Goldwater campaign in 1964 and says, Durham County all for Goldwater. Goldwater definitely did not carry Durham County, but he had a few ardent supporters here. I found this sign on the ground after the crowd left when Lady Bird Johnson was in town. So there were Goldwater protesters when Lady Bird came on a train through Durham in 1964 during President Johnson's campaign. So I've just accumulated, political items over the years. There's a couple of posters from Wilbur Hobby, who was a Durham guy who was head of the AFL-CIO in the state and ran as a populist for governor and then ran for the legislature. That was in 1972 and 74. And I have posters of Bill Bell and Becky Heron. Bill is our current mayor, and this shows him in his previous incarnation with sort of an afro haircut as the chair of the Board of County Commissioners. And several posters from other African-American political leaders, and there's a little sticker, a sign that would go on your car that says, "Vote now, use this car, your vote is important, Durham Committee on Negro Affairs." So this is from the late 60s when they were mobilizing black people to vote, after the Voting Rights Act was adopted. So before, it's funny, if you look at the election returns, before the Voting Rights Act was adopted, Durham voted for very conservative candidates. And then there was a big turnaround when black people began to vote in large numbers after the Voting Rights Act. So there's a poster for Nick Galifianakis, who was our congressman, and you may have heard of his nephew, Zach, who is currently in the movie about the campaign. But Nick was our House state representative and then our U.S. congressman, in the mid-'60s. George Miller, a very young George Miller, on a poster from when he ran for the state president of the Young Democrats Club of North Carolina. He's still a practicing attorney. Becky Heron, I have a poster of Becky Heron, a very young Becky Heron from the 1980s. She served 29 years on the Board of County Commissioners and just recently retired. And Mickey Mishaw is our state representative now. He ran in the 60s when he was the African-American candidate, and basically back then, white people voted for white people and black people voted for black people, and black people never got elected. So now Mickey has now been our representative for several terms now. And I have some other fans and material. I have a fan from the United House of Prayer for All People, which was a Durham community church. It's now out near the library. It used to be near the Venable Warehouse. And that's a fan that you'd fan yourself with when you sat in the non-air-conditioned church, and a similar fan from the Scarborough and Hargett Funeral Home. And this Scarborough with a UGH, the gentleman who operates that funeral home is known as Skeepy Scarborough, and he ran against Dewey Scarborough for the county commission in 1968. So Dewey had to put on his signs a big B-O-R-O to distinguish himself from B-O-R-O-U-G-H of Skeepy Scarborough. So there you go. This is a little envelope, and again, I think I found these things in these old buildings before they were torn down. This is what if you got a loan from NC Mutual, this held a coupon receipt book. So they wanted you to hang this on your wall in your kitchen where you wouldn't forget to send in your payment every month. And it has a picture of the old NC Mutual building on Parish Street. So this predates the construction of that building. That's the, quote, new NC Mutual building from the mid-1960s. But this is the original NC Mutual building on Parish Street, known as the Black Wall Street. So this is why it was called the Black Wall Street, because that's where the headquarters of those financial institutions were in the black community.
Tony Reevy. I've lived in Durham since I was 14, since 1975. I currently live in Watts Hillendale, and when I was high school age, I lived in northern Durham. I lived right near Northern High School. Katie, the museum director, asked me to do something with trains, and I collect railroad antiques. There were actually 5 railroads that served Durham, which is a lot for a city this size. It was because of the tobacco factories. A number of railroads wanted to reach the tobacco factories. I picked the Norfolk and Western Railroad because we're right next to it here. And what we have here, this is a signal lantern that I bought from an antique store that's marked N&W. All these items are N&W items, and the person I bought it from told me it was used on the Durham branch. This is a whistle post from the Durham branch. A whistle post was used to tell the engineer that a road crossing was coming up. They have trains, as you know, they have to signal for that. And then I had this open to the whistle post picture. This is an employee rule book for the Norfolk and Western, and explains, in here it's explained how the lantern was used and the whistle post. And then I also brought the schedule of the passenger trains that the Norfolk and Western ran into Durham. Their line into Durham started at Lynchburg, and this is copied from a period timetable I brought. And then finally, this is the only item here that's not from the Norfolk and Western. It's from the Southern Railway. This was used by ticket agents to stamp tickets with Durham as a destination. My mom gave me a railroad lantern, I think, when I was 7, and I started seriously collecting railroad items probably about, they require some money. It was right when I got out of college, so probably the late 80s. The reason I got very interested in railroad items is because, to me, they're living history. I mean, this whistle post, probably the Norfolk and Western made most of its signs in its Roanoke shops, and so, you know, the provenance of the sign goes all the way from the shops. I mean, it's all within the railroad. The railroad did everything itself. I mean, they were the first big business in the United States, and they had an old way of doing things, and their things have sort of a patina of use and of age that I just find both a way to try to see what things were like in the past, and also I think it sort of gives us an aura, an impression of what it was like to work for the railroad back then. These are substantial items that I think show their use and their wear well. And I think, like a lot of items, you know, you don't want to try to restore them too much because, you know, the patina of use is part of the history and provenance of the item.
Christian Karkow. I live in Raleigh, but I have lived here in Durham. These are a small part of a collection of my favorite tools. I'm a sculptor, and I use a lot of different types of tools, but these are a select few of my favorites. So this one here is it's used by telecommunications professionals, telecom guys, AT&T, all of them, especially for my father's generation, when they would hook phone lines up to buildings. And it looks like a pistol, and there's copper wires, and it allows you to hook up hundreds of these little copper wires to their respective posts in minutes. And then you can get a building wired for all the right phones. And what's nice is it looks good. It kind of looks like something out of Roy Rogers. It makes neat sounds. See that? It's the gears inside. And I don't have anything in my life that feels this good when you squeeze it. Somebody really made this right, and I can promise you no one knows what it is. So I wish all my things worked that well. I love this thing. What else? There's from the Civil Defense, this is a radiation meter, a Geiger counter that would have been used in a bomb shelter. That the people inside would have put this thing outside, and you can tell if it's safe to go outside. So this is a tool of safety. This is original to the 50s and 60s when it was made, and it still works. I don't think it works well, but it does work. This machine here, which is strange, looks like something out of Frankenstein's lab. It's an old motor. It's probably over 100 years. It's so old that it's about when we first invented alternating current, which is the first part of this century. And it was one of the first motors in production at the time for use by doctors and dentists to create a vacuum so that when they worked in our mouths, they can suck out the saliva. So when we bite down on that thing and it takes all the gook away, that's the machine that did it 100 years ago. Believe it or not. It actually looks better than it sounds. And this is a rubber stamp tree. It's just that. Lots of rubber stamps from the century. I don't know. None of them are very current. All the dates, none of them go up to 2012, but I collect them when I find them in garage sales and in dumpsters and in surplus centers, flea markets. These are all businesses in the Triangle, a lot of them state. And I make a rubber stamp tree, and every Christmas I put tree lights around it. Okay, grade A. That's from your Department of Health, would have been milk inspectors. We have, so you know, a lot of these stamps are from the scrap exchange. So donors to the scrap exchange, the state services, find their stuff here. We have mail stamps, bulk rate, commissions from some of the state agencies. That must be from Raleigh. Who knows? One that says book, if that wasn't obvious. What is it? It's a book. Stamp it. Okay. Don't confuse it with a tape, please. The last thing is it's what's called a hygrothermograph. And this came out of some laboratory locally, and I don't know where. And I restored it. It's a machine that measures humidity and temperature. It's useful in buildings like this, where it's a museum and you want to make sure your exhibit is held at the same temperature and humidity all the time. Computers can simulate this now. They have little graphs and will tell you and adjust the air conditioning, but nothing looks as good as this thing does. It has a clockwork in it. It has a piece of metal which tells you the temperature, and, best of all, blonde human hair from a woman, which is the standard for measuring humidity. Blonde hair gets curly on some rainy days. Funny how and that's what they use in science to determine as the fiber that reacts to humidity. That's how they standard.